our videos in the book of Isaiah. This is for our SOAP reading for our church at Oak Tree. And we are in the last 5 chapters of Isaiah, which it brings us not only to the end of Isaiah, but actually to the end of everything.
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
Because what we're going to be reading this week in Isaiah 62 through 66 is basically all about the future, even for us, all the way into eternity. So,
got me a little scared now.
But as we're talking, we talk off camera and different stuff. There's a lot of stuff in this section that, if you're familiar with other passages of prophecy, like the Revelation, for instance, you're going to be reading this and thought,
I've seen that. I know that.
I thought that was in the Revelation. Well, yes, it was. Yeah. Yes, it is. Because the Revelation is so steeped in Old Testament prophecy. It's the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. So this stuff isn't new. I mean,
and like we said, it's pieces of the puzzle, right? Yep. And it's all, at the end, it all has to come together.
It has to come
form
together.
the complete picture.
Right.
And no pieces missing.
Right.
Nothing on the floor.
This is a really, really big box with a lot of pieces over thousands of years, and every single one of them will finally fit into place.
I just got the picture of God, like, putting the puzzle together.
Well, so 62 through 66. You want to give us a
So overview. So last week the tone kind of shifted, and the tone shifted. It shifted from, hey, you're going to be taken away, and it shifted to when you come back, right? And that was kind of last week, and this week is all, okay, you're back, here's the future events, exactly like you were talking about. Seems to be in the future. So we're talking about land, and land shows up here. And one of the things that I'm sure I've been told before, but I got hit over the head this week on, was God is married to the land. Yeah. And we've been talking about, and we could do this whole thing just on land if we wanted to. Because a lot of times we talk off camera. So the last 20 minutes we've probably been talking about the land, and it's awesome. Yeah. When your deliverer comes. Chapter 63 seems to be, again, a picture about the Messiah shortly after the second coming, because there's still enemies in there. So somehow people are still seeing enemies, and I definitely saw correlations with Revelation in there. Yeah. Specifically Revelation chapter 14 verse 20, where it's talking about a wine press and the wrath of God, and as bad as it sounds, but blood that's up to the bridle of horses. Yep. And then again, chapter 64 seems to be all about Revelation too. Yep. So I want to talk a little bit more about the land, but I want to hear what you have what you want to pick out of there.
Well, some of the stuff is the land, and so we'll come back to that. 62, there, especially in the ancient world, there was a big deal about naming. Okay. In some religions, they actually believed if you knew the name of the god, or you spoke the name of the god, you almost brought him under your control. Yeah. Right? And so you invoke the name of the god, which is one of the reasons, I think, in the Mosaic Law, God said, do not misuse my name. That's not how we play this game. It may work for the false gods, but you don't use my name to do what you want to do.
Right? That's an interesting way of thinking of it.
Yeah. So he mentions these names. You're no longer going to be called abandoned. Your land will no longer be called desolate. In the book of Hosea, he uses the Hebrew word lo-ami, which means not my people. You'll no longer be called lo-ami, not my people. You'll be called ami, my people. And that shows up a couple of times. Your land will be married to him. You brought that up, and so we'll come back to that. Chapter 63 is what most people think of as the Battle of Armageddon. You refer to the wine press in Revelation 14. It's also chapter 19, where we come to this horses' bridles and the blood up to the thing. Where most people think of Armageddon as just this one big, huge battle, and Jesus is going to come in and wipe everything out. That's not how it's going to work. It's actually a series of smaller, I mean, there's going to be millions, whatever, but smaller battles that make up this entire war campaign.
Yeah, so fair to say that Armageddon's the last?
As he comes into Jerusalem, right? Okay. So Basra here in Edom is the first one. he's actually going to come here first. I think this is probably where the Jews are hiding out. They're being protected in the wilderness, Revelation 12. And they're being surrounded, right? And so Jesus actually comes and rescues them first, wipes out the enemies, then goes to the Mount of Olives, then comes down to Jerusalem in this literal bloodbath.
Right. Well, and you see blood
on his clothing. Right. Yeah. Yep. So we see that in there. Lots of stuff in chapter 64, 65. Chapter 63, 64, it's almost like a prayer of confession as Israel is returning to him, as they see him coming, and Jesus said, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So we see them, this is finally the return, the heart return of national Israel, not just individual Jews. And he comes and he delivers them, and like you said, the second coming, right? So after the tribulation, before the kingdom, as he sets up the kingdom. And then in chapter 5 would be basically God's response to them returning, like a verbal response, and what he's going to do. He's cleaning things up. I'm not going to destroy everyone. There's a remnant. The concept of the remnant is a big deal here at the end of Isaiah. And Paul picks up on that because the remnant there was always a believing subset of the Israelite nation, of believing Jews. And today the remnant, Paul says, are believing Jews who have become part of the church because of this dispensation.
So these would be Jews who became Christians.
Since this will take in our world today, right? Yeah, a Jew who has believed in Jesus as Messiah,
which would be a subset of
the overall nation. Right. So there will be a remnant of Jews in the tribulation, which will then carry over into the kingdom. Right. And
along with many more.
Yeah. Well, and Gentiles, and so many people, and an innumerable multitude who Revelation 7 have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb and escaped the great tribulation. And then chapter 66, actually in 65 and 66, we're seeing some new heavens and new earth language. So again, like we talked about last week, they didn't know anything about 1,000-year kingdom before the eternal state. So we're sort of blending some of this together because God hadn't revealed it to Isaiah yet. But after all of this deliverance language, the end of Isaiah is actually a curse. Because it's a reminder of God's not going to deliver everybody. He's going to deliver those who believe in him, who have returned to him. And for those who didn't, or who won't, rather, he calls them rebels. He calls them, they're not purifying themselves. I hate their deeds and their thoughts. So I'm coming to gather all the nations and the ethnic groups so that I can to do this mighty act. And there's going to be this massive judgment. A series of judgments, really, but a massive judgment. And then he goes into eternity, like I said, where there's this perspective of you've got eternal life and eternal death coexisting. And the fire doesn't go out, and the maggots don't die, and the rebels are consumed forever without being consumed. It's sort of like the burning bush.
Right.
God's holy fire.
How does it work? How does it? Yeah.
Right, can burn something without consuming it.
Right.
And so we see this: the rebels, unbelievers of all time, and the saints, the believers, will find it abhorrent, and yet, because we've been renewed in our minds and glorified, we'll understand that this is eternal justice.
Yeah, still able to function, still able to rationalize it.
And it's hard for us today to think how we will ever be able to think that way.
Right.
But God says that's how it's going to happen. And so as we close the book, which we're not doing right this second, but as Isaiah closes the book, it's this reminder that we've been spending all these chapters about God's deliverance and God's salvation. It's going to be wonderful, and here's what I'm going to do for you. But not everybody's going to be a part of that. And this is why we have to make sure that we continually get the gospel out, because there are those who will die forever.
Right.
That's a lot.
That's a bunch in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is this big concept. The concept of the land really does permeate this whole section.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about that a little bit because we talked when we first started about puzzle pieces. But the whole idea of something clicking and coming together, whether it's a Lego or a puzzle piece, doesn't really matter. But I had the Lego kind of click together for me. So it's always exciting, when that happens. And that is God being married to the Lamb.
Isn't that an interesting concept?
Yeah, and a couple weeks ago you set it up. I don't know if you meant to, but you set it up because you talked about God divorcing Israel.
Yeah.
Handing him the papers, and then them coming back and a remarriage.
Yeah.
And of course Jesus marrying the church.
Right.
So it wasn't unheard of, but I hadn't heard of God before doing that.
Yeah.
And now we have this marrying the land.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a cool thing, and yet it all fits together. So our concept of marriage, is different than God's concept of marriage.
Yeah.
And which
he uses it as an illustration.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
kind of cool.
So God and Israel are already married and divorced.
Yeah.
Okay. And they will be and they will be remarried.
Right.
Jesus and the church are not married yet. So that's still
future.
So we can see some of those differences there. And as we've talked, the land is actually God's. He says repeatedly here in Isaiah and other places, the land is not Israel's. The land, God said, I gave it to Israel, or I'm going to use the term, he leased it to Israel.
Yeah. Well, they get to use it.
They get to use it.
Right. And there's the whole manager scene.
Yeah.
And,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. You got to be over it.
Which is also why I think he can use the terminology, I brought you into this land, I can take you out of the land, I can bring you back, because it's actually my land. It's not your land.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, so, keep going, because it's exciting.
So what we see, I'm pointing to Joel 3 here, one of the things, and I know we've talked about this, and we might have talked about this on the video before, in Matthew 25, there is a sheep and goat judgment at the end of the tribulation. And you're familiar with the passage, you saw me in prison, you saw me naked, you didn't do these things, or you did do these things, and so that's the judgment. Well, those are on the nations and how they treated Israel. The least of these, my brethren, are the Jewish people. Jesus is a Jew. Okay, the least of these, my brethren. So you go to Joel chapter 3. Look, in those days and at that time I will return the exiles to Judah and Jerusalem. Then I'll gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment against them there. That's the nations. So this is the sheep and goat judgment in Matthew 25. Concerning my people, Israel, who are my inheritance. So they're going to be judged in how they treated Israel, the people. But also, whom they scattered among the nations. But here's the next one. They partitioned my land, and they cast lots for my people. God says one of the things he's going to judge the Gentile nations for is what they did with his land.
Right.
And by partitioning it and dividing it out, he said, that's mine. You don't get to do that.
Right. So by losing it, by giving it away, by making deals with other nations, that's...
So the stuff that we see today,
right.
all the way back to 1948. You got the 6-Day War, you got 1976, you got all of these things, all the way up to the two-party solution or the two-state solutions that we see today. Every time somebody suggests, well, if you give this land to the Palestinians, the West Bank, and the this and that, and
then we can
finally have peace. God's keeping track of that. And he's saying, you are dividing up. That's not their land. They're using it. That's my land. I'm married to the land, and you're chopping it up for your purposes, and I'm keeping track of that, and you will be judged for that.
Right.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Israel is the apple of his eye. Israel is his chosen people, but that land is special to him for some reason. And he's going to, in the kingdom, it's going to even be bigger than what it is now. But the concept that he would even bring that out specifically, they partitioned my land, and so I'm going to judge him for that.
and to not be happy about it. I mean, there's some tone in there. Yeah. Wow.
So, we here at Oak Tree, we teach that Israel is God's chosen people, and all the way back to Genesis chapter 12. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. And personally, and we don't make public political statements as a church, but personally, I think one of the reasons that our nation has been blessed over the years is because we've consistently been on Israel's side in one way or another. Because God said, "Those who bless you, I will bless; those who curse you, I will curse." And it's not a foolproof, just let Israel do anything that she wants to, and there's still some
and
political
certainly our
stuff.
nation has been blessed, so we're looking for why. This could be a reason.
And there are some people, and I'm not making political or de facto statements, but there are some people who believe that some of the disasters that we've seen in recent years are closely tied to some of these active two-state solutions and dividing up of the land. Now, I'm not God. I can't say whether that's true or not. I can say that God's not happy when the land's divided.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
interesting.
And as we, move from one administration to the next, one Congress to the next, every couple of years, as a church and as believers, we should continue to pray for the nation of Israel, and we should continue to pray for our own government officials as they deal with Israel, because apparently God likes them. He's chosen them.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot of stuff in there.
A lot of stuff.
Too much to swallow in one session.
Yeah.
But that's the whole idea, right? Going through Isaiah at a higher level, not necessarily quickly, but being able to read through it and picking out bits and parts.
So make sure that as you're reading, that you're jotting your notes down or questions or comments. You can ask us either in the comments below or, text or, catch us in person or whatever, and we can talk about those things. Because, this is life and death. This is eternity. We're setting up eternity here.
Right. And it's choices.
Yeah. So as you finish the book of Isaiah this week, and you get down to the end of chapter 66, and you're faced with this eternal life and eternal death right there, let's not forget why we do what we do. Let's not forget that this is not just an exercise in mental acuity or, how much we know the Bible or we read through another book. Right. But this really is life and death, and God has already laid out how it's going to work. And He intends and expects and asks us to be a part of what He's doing, not just doing our own thing and asking Him to bless it.
Where's our heart? Where's our mind?
Yeah.
And who are we talking to about it?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, good point. Very good point.
Well, thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part. We'd love to hear from you. And we will see you back here next week with a brand new series of what we're going to be doing. Bye now.